Hello and welcome to Middlebury 5-0. I am your host, Officer Chris Mason, and with me in the studio today is Bruce Lisman. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you in the studio.
Looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So you are one of the gubernatorial hopefuls, the upcoming election this November.
Well, our election is a primary. So
Sure.
At the moment, there are two Democrats running and there are two Republicans running, and our primary is on August 9th.
Yes.
It's a midsummer kind of date, so absentee ballots are available June 24th.
Right.
So I think that's important for people to come out and vote.
Mm-hmm. And which party are you running?
I'm a Republican.
Republican?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'm running against the current lieutenant governor, and we're in active campaign mode.
Right. I would imagine so.
Yeah, that's right. So that means working 5 or 6 days a week.
Yeah.
It's meeting lots of people. I've met more than 3,000 people since this began in mid or late October.
Sure.
Plus small groups and big groups. I've been on, of course, television with people like you,
Yep.
and interviewed by other representatives of media, and also radio stations, and having a blast. I mean, this turns
wonderful.
out to be a lot of fun meeting people. If you listen long enough to a Vermonter, you're going to hear the problem posed and a solution offered.
Right.
And oftentimes they make tremendous sense. So I'm having a great time.
So do you consider yourself an extrovert?
No, the opposite is true. I'm not. No, I've spent most of my adult life looking at my shoes. I'm an introvert.
Yep.
So going into a big room is not easy.
Sure.
Meeting new people, but I like people a great deal, and I find that they're a lot more interesting than anything else at that moment. So
Right.
when you tell me your story, I'm listening to it. I'd rather hear your story than mine, believe me.
Yeah. So I'm kind of an introvert myself.
Are you?
Being a police officer, you're compelled to be a bit of an extrovert.
Yeah.
You have to put yourself
It's
out
not
there
easy
quite a
though,
bit.
is it?
It is. It's very challenging.
Yeah, a little exhausting, I find, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting. I assumed you were an extrovert, for God's sakes.
No. But I have heard it said that introverts who take on the role of extroverts tend to do a pretty good job.
Yeah, maybe.
So
I'll have to think about
Yeah.
that. Well, I'm old enough to have had practice at it. You know, I was in a business that had a very much of a marketing and sales texture to it, meeting new people and clients that I didn't know. In some cases, clients who didn't want to see me. Which,
Okay.
you know, your first response is, okay, if you don't want to see me, I don't want to see you. But that sounds great at home. But
I wish I could take that approach. That would work out so well for me.
I think I took that approach once and regretted it.
Right.
And so
Yep.
after that, I said, no, we're gonna get to know each other.
Sure.
Yeah.
What kind of business was it?
Well, I was in the finance. So I should say I grew up in Burlington, and
Okay. Just
my
up the
father,
road.
yeah,
Yeah.
up the street. My father was a school teacher, and my mother was worked at the University of Vermont. Mostly to get my brother and me employee discount tuition. And
Yep.
I can paraphrase another famous fellow. He said, when asked about his very fortunate career, he said, first 3/4 of it was to be born in a family that cared a lot, offered security, and gave me the right elements of values. And I would say for me that's true too, because my father was a very caring guy who would listen, offer advice sparingly, but was invaluable. And
Sure.
I think my brother and I learned about the value of community service, about ambition, about the dignity of work, particularly the dignity of work. And my father, I don't remember when this happened, my brother alerted me to this change, this development, decided he only wanted good news during supper, which began at 6:05 sharp and ended at 6:35
That is
sharp.
an excellent policy.
Yeah, so he was tired of hearing about broken arms and broken the things we bring home on a weekend.
Yep.
And so we would it was either good news or no news, and then the bad news would come at about 6:36. Here's the bad news: I failed the test.
So maybe you could institute that policy as governor.
I like it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing it did was it made me into an optimist, introvert, true, but that kind of very quiet way of changing the conversation was making me more optimistic, I think. I'm not sure that I wasn't anyway. And because it was going to be a good news or no news, it wasn't just making up stuff, it was having a conversation that generally rotated around subjects that we all found enjoyable. So it's quite for a small thing, it was really quite interesting.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
So I actually began working at 15.
Oh, yeah?
I was a dishwasher, and
Yep.
yeah, I'm still friends with my boss. I thought he was so old. He was only 7 years older than me, and I was, he's probably 10 years older than me at the time. And yeah, I was a dishwasher. My father was a great guy. He would drop me off and pick me up. I didn't know how to drive when I was at that age.
Do you remember what you got paid at
Nothing.
15?
Nothing.
It was volunteer.
Chris, I'm still resentful.
Bet you are. I would be too.
Even today, he says, he says, yeah,
I would have calculated how much he owes you.
When I see him, I say, Ralph, where's my money?
That's right. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, my father used to say, did you tell him to give you a raise? Practically every week, because he didn't have a lot of hot water.
Right.
And it would take forever to get the dishes washed. You'd wait for the thing to refill.
Yep.
And I'd screw up my courage and ask him for a raise, and he would respond with a terrific speech about why America's great. Get in the
Excellent.
car. Get in the car. He said, "Did you ask him for a raise?" I said, "Well, I'd heard how America's so great." My father would visibly slump.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, my first job was very similar to that. I worked in a fish and chip shop. I think I started when I was 14 when I started.
Really?
Yeah. I got paid 50 pence an hour.
Really?
I remember, yeah.
Yeah. They got you cheap.
They did, yeah, very cheap, yeah.
Did you like it?
I did not know. It was a dingy basement that I was working in most of the time, and it was cold, and I was peeling potatoes. It's very Dickensian.
I was just, my first thought was, that's Charles Dickens. Dark,
yeah, pretty much.
Dark room, cobblestones.
Right.
Yeah, so I also worked as a side cook for a while. Frankly, a side cook then was peeling potatoes and mashing them, and really important things like that. Didn't make me a cook. I don't know about you.
Right. No.
No. In fact, probably convinced me not to become one.
Indeed, yes.
Psychological damage from that.
So what inspired you to make a run at the governorship?
Yeah.
What is driving that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And before I ran, I wanted to be sure I knew why I was running.
Absolutely.
And for what reason. Well, I can tell you I don't have any interest in a political career. And
so this is not a stepping stone towards a presidential.
No, I don't think so. Not unless you want to do mud wrestling. Boy, those debates are pretty odd. They're not really debates, are they? They're more like a pushing match. You probably would break those guys up if you saw them on the street.
That's right. Yeah.
So I wanted to be careful about why I was running, and wanted to be certain that it wasn't merely ego or just wanted to stay busy or something silly. And so I think the state's in a bad place. I think it's largely self-inflicted.
Right.
I think people know that. Some are having a sense of unease about things. Some are angry with their governor or legislator. Some are disturbed by what's happened in their communities. Front porches sagging, houses needing a paint job, strangers in town, businesses that were there are gone. And outside of Chittenden County, that's very common for people to talk about. And I have been listening to other people's ideas and determined that we have, with help from others, better ideas. And those ideas and are solutions, really, to problems that Vermonters and Vermont faces. Certainly we need a more competent governor, just my opinion, and a more competent administration.
Yep.
And I separate myself from the other three candidates because I have not been in office, didn't work for government, and in large measure they're similar in their views, not so different than the current agenda. A lot of tweaking. There's some separation amongst them, but not a lot. And so if you want the usual things to happen, then those are the usual people you can elect, and you get probably the usual results. Whereas I come at it non-political, never run for office. I'll tell you about my run in the 5th grade for class president.
I would love to hear that.
Chris, it was not a successful effort, but nonetheless, I come at it with a different perspective, and I think it's ideas that are different than theirs, and premises about solving problems that seem intractable. So we talk about the cost of living in our state. The cost of a starter house is too much. Property tax is too great. Rent's too high. We talk about the cost of gasoline in certain of the markets or things like that. We can talk about it, but we can do some things about it. For example, we can understand better what our government's role in how much we spend to live here. So everyone should be able to see the fees and surcharges and taxes for some period of time, so the last 3 to 5 years. Let everybody see it, and pressure will mount on the legislature and the governor to begin to change that, to roll back things that they've inflicted on us that raise the cost to live here.
Well, it is enormously expensive.
Yes.
So, I mean, I recognize that as a person living in Vermont, but just talking to people, talking to Vermonters, it comes up again and again and again.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing, because the underlying theme that I see, I'd be curious what you hear, because you talk to so many people. But I hear a lot about a government that doesn't listen to me. In one form or another, people will always inject in there, sure, I know my state senator, or might even know the lieutenant governor, but no one listens to me. And because they've been complaining for years about the cost of living and property taxes in particular. And that complaint was growing by the year, and the state responded, the legislature and governor responded by transferring $25 million or so out of the education fund into the general fund to solve a budget problem in 2011 or 12, and that set off a chain reaction of higher property taxes. So people say, wait a minute, I was complaining about my property tax, how fast it's growing and how high it is, and in response they did something that would raise it. That's not listening. And I think people really feel put upon by that kind of insensitivity. And in response, Chris, they passed legislation that they think will help, and I think people are smart enough to know, Vermonters are plenty smart, and they know legislation that would force consolidation might not be the right answer for them. So it's really, it's an interesting time, but I'll be curious, do you hear the same thing? My government doesn't listen to me, or I'm disenfranchised?
I feel like there's a lot of engagement locally, at the local level. So what I mostly hear about politics and people's relationships with politicians is positive. People do feel like they're fairly well listened to, and people hear what they have to say. But that's within Middlebury, within Addison County. So I don't know whether different.
I actually think there's a parallel here. So in Washington, we know they can't get anything done, or if they can, it's not easy. And they've largely ceded so much influence and control to the states. But a lot of the states, including ours, is not a place that gets things done, and they've turned a lot over to the towns and cities, and maybe that's the way it should be. Yeah, I mean, what I mostly see is town government. I interact with the people that are on the select board. I talk to the town manager. So in that respect, I feel like there's a tremendous amount of engagement. I know that I know my state representatives fairly well, in the House at least. I'm not so familiar with the senators. Well, I think getting to know them is important. Making sure they know how we feel or what we believe in is equally important. I think sometimes they act differently when they're in Montpelier. I'm not suggesting it's a summer camp where they're not serious, but my experience, and Vermonters share this with me, is legislators who are their neighbors act one way at home and talk about issues, but seem to act differently when presented with a group that wants to pass a bill. Maybe we need to understand better how they're seeing things. Well, it's a position of public service, and it's so there's an obligation there. To represent the people and their interests. And that's right. So that's what it's all about. So they either are misreading us, or we are not being clear with them what we want, and maybe it's a shared issue of sorts. But I think in particular this administration has not been good at listening. I think they listen best while speaking. And that's a recipe for trouble. So I'm running because I think I can solve problems. I think I can take us in a completely different direction, and one that will result ultimately in a more affordable state, a government that actually fairly sings, if you will. That's how well it performs. And an economy that starts to renew itself, not just in Chittenden County, but also in counties that have been suffering population loss in the last few years. There's a lot of young people that leave the state. I've noticed that. It's tough for young people. Maybe. I think part of that is those high living costs. I believe you're right. High cost of housing, high cost of property tax.
You know, it's tough for people who are just making a start.
It is tough. Maybe it's tough for anyone who's starting their career at a young age. Right. It's particularly tough when there's not a choice of positions, and the cost to rent a place seems excessive compared to what they're often receiving in salary. Right. It's a hard combination. No, people want to live in a place they didn't grow up in. With your accent, I'm pretty sure you were not born here.
I'm not a native Vermonter, no.
Could be in the witness protection program, but anyway.
That's right. I'm doing a very good job disguising myself.
Who would have thought?
That's right.
Who would have thought
undercover. That's right.
Let's hold on. I have another show. I want to hear more about why you're in witness protection. So it's pretty funny.
I think there's a movie plot in there somewhere. I think there's a script. I think.
Well, you've got the studio. I think you could probably produce this show.
I probably could.
Right. And you know the producer here pretty well. So
I do. Yeah, I'm well acquainted with the producer. Yeah,
so I'll be watching for the next episode on Netflix. Yeah. So I think so some of us will want to leave because we grew up in a small town, want to go to a big town or a big city, and lots of people who are from New York or Boston or Washington want to move to a state just like ours. We just have to make it affordable and offer them the opportunities they would expect to find here. So we have 43,000 college kids who are here from 4 to 6 years generally, and some of the schools place a lot of their graduates in Vermont, but I think we could do better. And if we did incrementally, that's a lot of young people who would stick here.
Absolutely.
So Middlebury has got a large community of alums, young men and women in Burlington. I know some here. But I think we could work harder at orienting them either through internships or apprenticeships or merely seeing different parts of the state and give them the opportunity to see the place to grow their business or their family right here.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of programs that look towards bringing the college students more into the community. But I think there are still a lot of college students in Middlebury who don't even know Middlebury that well, let alone the rest of the state.
Yes. For those of us in college who rarely left their room to go to class. So I'll tell you, my father, I think I meant my father went back to college, and we shared a couple of classes. And,
wow.
He sat in the first row, I sat in the back row. His posture was perfect. Mine wasn't. He took copious notes. Obviously, I didn't. And he would get an A, and I would do my best. So you figure it out later in life. Well, so a young man or woman in graduating from or going to Bennington College down south may know nothing about the beauty of this community and the lively culture that's here and the opportunities that might be here. And someone from Goddard College near Montpelier may know little about Bennington and the charm of that community and the opportunities, and certainly housing there is quite inexpensive. And I think we need to do a systematic job at showing them our state. And if we can get 1,000 kids a year who would otherwise have gone to stay here, well, we're rebuilding, if you will, an ecosystem of young men and women.
Right. Well, I think that's a fabulous idea. It's a fabulous perspective. I hear a lot of people talk about Middlebury College in particular, because that's the local college, as a tremendous economic resource within our community for the money that it brings in, the people that it brings in, the talent, all the staff, the professors. So definitely a huge piece of our local economy. But to think of it also in terms of a more long-term resource, introducing those young people, those very gifted, talented young people.
That's right.
To the state, with a view towards keeping them here, keeping that expertise and that talent local.
It's a resource we want to keep here, but most programs that have been tried in this country, discounts for tuition if you agree to stay, or generally don't work well. I mean, this is America. Mobility is really an important part of our lives. So many of us taste a big city or a small city in contrast to what we know. That's perfectly fine. Those who have been imported here by the colleges, or those who are here as Vermont students, though, be great if they stayed. So just a small % a year increase. Champlain College now places half their graduating class in Vermont, mostly Chittenden County. And I may be wrong on the statistic, but 10 years ago it was less than a third. That's a big increase. It's a small college, not so many graduates, but it's the idea of having young men and women, but also young men and women who are involved with technology or some other occupation that makes it so important.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So what's your view of the Vermont economy? I mean, we've kind of skirted around it, and we've talked about it, and we talked about some issues related to it, property taxes and such, and they all play into it. But how do you perceive the economy?
I think it's pretty thin, downright fragile.
Yep.
I think much of it is centered in the greater Chittenden County area.
Right.
It helps. It's a big hunk of our economy and large percentage of population, more than 25%. But it's thin and weak outside of that. Down south, in Rutland, Bennington, Windham counties, up north, pockets of great weakness, and certainly Northeast Kingdom, particularly the most northern and eastern part, are really still suffering. So it's an economy that's centered in one place. That's great. Good for Burlington. It's good for our state to have Burlington and greater Chittenden County. The rest of Vermont, though, has got a thinning population base and a thinning economy. Right. We need to do a lot more. We need to do a lot more. One thing we can do, not just hope that college kids will stay here and work hard at it, but we need to make a pact among ourselves that we don't want any more employers leaving. Now, listen, you can't make them stay either.
Right.
But if they're based in another country or another state, they don't know Vermont the way we do. Sure. But by building a relationship with the CEO or CFO of the company, wherever they're based, St. Louis or Switzerland, doesn't matter, I think we have the opportunity of growing with them. As they face challenges, let's try to solve them. As they speak about reinvestment someplace, let's make it here. Let's not spend too much time and literally no money on attracting businesses. Let's keep what we've got. And that goes for the small Vermont-based companies. We take them for granted. You know, you knew Bob when he started, and today he's got 25 or 50 employees, and he's still there, but he has the same growing pains that we all have, whether it's space or costs or parking spaces, all significant events for a growing business, or the availability of talent in particular. We don't want them leaving.
Right.
We want to help them grow, not by giving them money, but by giving them help.
Right.
That's a whole different deal. So those are things we could do to make our economy better, just taking what we've got and making it a lot better.
Yeah. Well, I've spoken to people in economic development. I have some connections with people in
you
economic.
do?
Yeah, my wife works.
No kidding. So that whole family
in that
thing
field,
is really big here.
Yeah,
I get that. Okay.
And that's very much in keeping with what I hear them say, that you've really got to focus on the local businesses, particularly those grassroots organizations, and supporting them and help them build, because they're the businesses that are going to stay in the community as they grow, as they flourish. They're not just going to pick up and leave, because they've got those roots, they've got those connections. So that's really what's going to drive the economy.
That's right. So it's an excellent point. I think economic development, the concept is a vague one anyway. What does it mean? And oftentimes we think it's money, and sadly the only example that many of us know is the $1 million given to Global Foundries.
Right. Probably
part of a bigger thing. We won't know the truth of that. So when I talk, or you might talk about economic development, people, Vermonters say, well, that's just like corporate welfare. And I'm saying, no. If I give you $50 a week to be my friend, when I run out of money, you won't be my friend anymore, because we made each other a commodity.
Right.
If we have a relationship, and at some point out in the future you say, listen, can you loan me $50? Well, I will, of course, because we're friends. We have a relationship built on conversation and trust, and common interests that have expanded beyond just common coffee cups. So that's building a relationship, and that's what we need to do with our employers, big and small. And by the way, you know, 96% of our employers are small businesses.
Right.
And 60% of the employees work for a small business, and we need to make sure they're okay. And when you buy a cup of coffee in the morning, it's a convenience to you, but the person who sold it to you, you're a customer. He's the business, and we just take them for granted. We need to understand them better, understand how they're doing and what they need to do better or get bigger. So some small percentage of them have ambitions that would just knock your socks off. But we don't want to wait until they leave to go to Boston or something, or Montreal, while they're getting that ambition into a business. Let's help them out. Yeah.
So we have a whole lot of time left, but I wanted...
Really? Really? Isn't this a 2-hour show? You promised. 120 minutes, uninterrupted. I can just talk about anything.
Well, I wanted to touch a little bit upon the opiate epidemic that's been kind of sweeping through our state of late. Certainly there's been a lot of focus upon that, a lot of press. It doesn't really seem to be abating, though.
No.
It seems to be, gathering pace, if anything.
No, it seems like. And I think the governor, just to be fair, the governor, when he spoke about opiates and even developing the early stage intervention, including judiciary, the police in particular, and mental health, both said and did good things around that. Right. Unfortunately, the state has spent its money so badly in the last 5 or 6 years that we're not able to completely fund an adequate opiate epidemic antidote, if you will.
Right.
And which is, of course, there is a drug that literally will help them, and that's important, but this is a labor-intensive world of as soon as you say intervention, it's not a robot coming in with an automatic hand.
Absolutely.
Real people, whether it's a police officer, a judge, or a side judge, or mental health people, or even physical help people, or consultants. It's a labor-intensive business, so it's expensive, and we're going to have to find the funds to get a grip on it.
Right.
There are programs in the country that have been successful, but in the end, if you listen long enough, though they might have treatments that are new or novel, or it's a labor-intensive effort.
It is.
Well-practiced, experienced people who are really doing great work, committing themselves to saving the life of another, but it's persistence. The relapse rate is so high. And at the same time, we need an active police force to take out the bad guys from our streets who are selling those drugs and looking for people to, expand their client base.
Right.
So it's money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're going to get it right, we're going to have to find a source of funds to fund whatever it takes to stop this thing. This thing is exceedingly dangerous for our society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so often it seems it has its roots in other issues as well. There are so often mental health issues underlying the addiction, and your poverty is so frequently a component, and trauma. So it's complex. It is very labor intensive. I would absolutely agree with that.
But Chris, you've touched on areas that are really important to all of us and to Vermonters, because we have that DNA that says we want to make sure our neighbor is well taken care of, that need to offer compassion, helping hand, as well as being frugal, a not inconsistent set of characteristics. So it's a real problem. So when you have persistent poverty, it's very hard to say that a child of a family in poverty or a broken family is going to be given an equal opportunity. We speak of opportunity in America as if it were ordinary, when in fact it's quite an exceptional characteristic of our country. But children of the poor don't have an equal opportunity. Children of busted families, well, you know all this, and where spousal abuse is a part of it, or drug or alcohol abuse, they are not going to have an equal opportunity. It wasn't their fault to have been born to that family, but in some cases we are unable to protect them well enough. I don't mean DCF. It's an easy thing to criticize perfectly good people doing great work. That's not fair. But we know just here that if you see a child in a family that's busted, is afflicted with all those abuse things, we know that child is going to need either extra help or is predetermined not to have a great life.
Sure.
It's the extraordinary kid who can pull herself out of there.
Right. Well, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
It's over?
Pretty much,
Chris,
yeah.
Holy cow, that's hard.
I feel like we could go on for 2 hours
boy,
quite comfortably.
I didn't get a chance to hear more about you. I want to hear about what you do all day. That's a lot more interesting than what I'm doing.
We'll have to do another show where you interview me.
Yeah, I'm in. Let me know. I'll be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show,
It's my
Bruce.
pleasure. Thanks so very much.
So until next time, drive safe, and may all your mischief be of the lawful persuasion.